She didn't see it coming. She didn't expect betrayal to wear a lab coat in front of the brightest minds, investors, and cameras rolling for the big reveal. A young black woman was about to be erased. What they didn't know was this: her brilliance couldn't be hidden, no matter how hard they tried. Welcome to her secrets, her stories. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're rewatching from, and what your name is. We want to meet you, our community of truth seekers. You'll see why this story matters. The moment she stepped into the building that morning, the air felt electric. Her badge clipped neatly to a blazer, her notebook full of equations and insights. She had no idea that prestige often comes wrapped in prejudice. Her name was Amara Lewis, 24, a mathematician whose calculations could shift the trajectory of missions, whose code could unlock doors no one had imagined. She had worked tirelessly, spent late nights at the lab, sacrificing sleep and social life to master complex algorithms, to understand orbital mechanics, to anticipate variables no one else saw. She had been invited to a high-profile project at one of the nation's most respected space agencies, a chance to contribute to a mission that could alter the course of history, a mission no one in her department had dared to touch before. Everything seemed perfect: the polished floors, the humming of computers, the neatly organized workstations. Colleagues smiled politely, some nodding in admiration, others sizing her up silently, questioning why someone like her had earned a place at this table. She felt the weight of history on her shoulders, a responsibility she embraced with pride. And yet, as she walked into her first team meeting, subtle cracks began to show. Ideas she voiced were ignored or dismissed, only to be repeated by others and lauded as innovation. Technical insights she shared were glossed over, while her male counterparts received praise for thinking creatively. She noticed the sidelong glances, the almost imperceptible smirks when she corrected calculations in front of supervisors, the tiny shakes of the head from executives who believed they knew better. The first hint of humiliation came subtly: a meeting where she had prepared a detailed simulation of orbital trajectories, one that proved a critical flaw in the project design. She presented it confidently, explaining her methodology step by step. The room fell silent, nods from some, skeptical frowns from others. Then one senior engineer, a man with decades of experience, leaned over, glanced at her notes, and restated her calculations as if they were his own. Laughter followed from a few polite claps from the rest, while she sat frozen, anger and disbelief rising in her chest. Her heart raced, a mix of shock and fury, but she kept her composure. She understood then what she had suspected. Brilliance alone wasn't enough here. Prestige, connections, and privilege were the invisible walls she now faced. The next days were a battle of patience. Emails she sent were left unanswered. Questions she asked were brushed off, and reports she submitted mysteriously lost in the system. Every step forward felt like pushing against a tide of deliberate obstruction. Yet she persisted. She knew the stakes, not just for herself, but for the project, for the missions that depended on her calculations. And then came the day of the presentation to investors and the scientific advisory board. The room gleamed with polished wood and shining chrome, large windows letting in the morning sun, and a sense of gravitas weighed on every attendee. Amara had prepared meticulously, rehearsing her explanation of a crucial new propulsion formula that could save millions of dollars in years of work. She approached the podium, her notes in hand, her voice steady. She began outlining the calculations, the potential outcomes, the implications for orbital efficiency. Her diagrams were clear, her logic flawless. But as soon as she stepped back, a colleague, a man who had subtly undermined her for months, stepped forward and began explaining her formula in his own words. He smiled confidently, glanced at her as if to say, "You can't touch this." Gasps and polite applause filled the room. Investors nodded, impressed, while Amara's contributions were publicly overshadowed, her expertise dismissed as if it never existed. A cold knot of disbelief twisted in her stomach. She had worked for this moment, only to have her brilliance stolen, her credibility questioned, her very presence minimized. Whispers floated across the room, some sympathetic, most indifferent. Cameras captured every second, recording her poised silence as the world saw her achievement handed to another. The humiliation was palpable, an invisible weight pressing on her shoulders, making the air feel thick. And yet, in the midst of this orchestrated erasure, a spark ignited within her, a quiet, burning determination. She would not be forgotten. She would not allow her name, her work, or her intellect to be erased. Amara left the meeting with her head held high, her notebook clutched tightly, knowing this was not the end. This was only the beginning of a fight no one in that room had anticipated. The unfairness stung, yes, but it fueled her resolve. Every slight, every dismissal, every condescending nod became part of the fire that would drive her next moves. She remembered her mentor's words: "History remembers the bold, not the timid. Do not shrink to fit their comfort." And she would remember them. She would act. And when the moment came, the world would see the truth of her brilliance, undeniable and unstoppable. But before that could happen, she had to survive this first test, navigate the subtle and overt bias surrounding her, and prove not just to them, but to herself, that intellect and integrity could not be silenced. And so the stage was set, the challenge clear, and the first act of injustice had been witnessed. The cameras had recorded it, the investors had seen it, and the room had judged her quietly, dismissively, unfairly. But the quiet storm had begun, and Amara Lewis, brilliant, meticulous, unyielding, was already planning her rise from the shadows. She thought she was alone. She thought the walls of the office, the polished floors, and the bright conference lights were all that separated her from defeat. But she was wrong. Slowly, quietly, she began to notice it, the subtle nods from a colleague in the hallway, the whispered agreement when she corrected a flawed calculation, the way a senior engineer lingered near her desk, not to monitor, but to offer a subtle hint, a clue that she was not without allies. Each small gesture was a lifeline, a reminder that brilliance cannot truly be hidden, and that even in a place designed to diminish her, sparks of integrity and loyalty still existed. Amara Lewis began to act differently. She arrived earlier, stayed later, carefully documenting every conversation, every overlooked email, every meeting where her contributions were dismissed or claimed by others. She created a system of notes, cross-referencing timestamps, memoranda, and calculations, building a secret archive that proved her work, her methods, and her conclusions beyond dispute. Each line she wrote, each chart she preserved, became armor for the day she would have to confront the truth. She observed patterns, memorized office schedules, the routines of those who sought to undermine her, the small inconsistencies in reports that could reveal intentional sabotage. In the quiet corners of the lab, she whispered her ideas to herself, rehearsed her explanations, envisioned the moment when clarity would triumph over arrogance. Then came the first true twist. The mentor she had trusted for guidance, the quiet senior mathematician who had watched her quietly for months, approached her. His presence alone caused a small shock of relief to run through her chest. "Amara," he said softly, "I've seen what they're doing. I can help you make sure your work cannot be erased." He handed her a thumb drive, discreet, unassuming but packed with crucial data and corroborating evidence from past projects, internal memos, and email trails. Her heart pounded. Someone had her back. Someone powerful enough to help her turn the tide. And in that moment, she realized she no longer sought victory merely for herself. She sought justice, integrity, and the recognition of the work that could change the course of their mission, their agency, and perhaps even history. Days turned into weeks. She moved with quiet precision, safeguarding her findings, sharing confidential insights only with those she knew she could trust. She devised a plan, step by step, for how to present irrefutable evidence to leadership, to ensure that when the day came, her contributions would be recognized and the deception of her rivals laid bare. But the work was not without fear. Each email opened, each document copied, each conversation overheard could have meant disaster. A single misstep would undo everything, expose her to retaliation, perhaps even cost her career. Yet, fear became fuel, sharpening her mind and focusing her every action. She practiced patience, timing her moves with care, aligning her steps to the rhythm of office routines, to the subtle dance of politics and power that surrounded her. And as the weeks unfolded, she noticed the subtle changes in her environment. Colleagues who had been distant began to offer small signs of support. Emails once ignored now received careful attention. A supervisor, known for his impartiality, asked to review her calculations personally, not for critique, but for verification. The small victories built a quiet confidence within her, the kind that did not announce itself but strengthened the soul. She began to speak with more conviction during meetings, testing the waters, revealing hints of the truth in ways that could not be dismissed, in ways that could not be twisted. She discovered allies where she had not expected, from interns to engineers, to administrators, all quietly nodding when she passed, all part of the invisible network of those who recognized merit and integrity. And then came the first spark of justice, a moment that lit a fire in her chest and defined the path ahead. During a closed-door technical review, she presented an idea that had been stolen by another colleague, integrating it seamlessly into the current project while maintaining the integrity of her calculations. She watched as senior staff attempted to correct her, tried to claim misalignment, but she held her ground. Her mentor quietly whispered reassurances, signaling that this time, the truth could not be denied. The room shifted, the dynamics subtly tilting in her favor, and for the first time she felt a surge of hope, a taste of vindication. She realized then that this was bigger than herself. The project, the agency, the future of their work all depended on the courage to act, to protect knowledge, to ensure that merit triumphed over bias, that brilliance could not be silenced. That night, she left the office later than ever, walking past the polished corridors, breathing in the quiet air of possibility. She knew that the real challenge lay ahead, the public recognition of her contributions, the exposure of those who had tried to suppress her. But the seed had been planted, the first crack in the wall of injustice had appeared, and her resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. Amara Lewis, once isolated and underestimated, was no longer a passive participant. She was a strategist, a protector of truth, a quiet force growing stronger with each day, preparing for the moment when the world would finally witness her genius. and though fear lingered, it was now accompanied by purpose. Each sleepless night, each careful calculation, each whispered conversation was a step toward vindication. And as she looked at her notes one last time before leaving, she whispered to herself, "I am not invisible, I will not be erased, and one day everyone will see exactly what I have built." The struggle was only beginning, but the path forward was illuminated. Justice, even if hidden for now, was already taking shape, and the quiet power within her promised that the world would not remain blind for long. The moment had finally arrived. Amara Lewis had prepared, planned, and endured, and now the world was about to witness the truth she had fought to protect. Within hours of submitting her meticulously documented evidence, the cascade began. Emails and reports that had been buried for months surfaced. Her colleagues who had claimed her work were confronted with undeniable proof. The executives who had tried to silence her were called to explain themselves to the board and legal teams. News of the scandal leaked to the press, first quietly, then with headlines that demanded attention. Brilliance erased, now revealed. Hidden figures of modern innovation, who really built the mission. Investors, initially unaware, began to question the integrity of the management. The public outcry was immediate. Social media erupted with admiration for the young mathematician who had refused to let her work be stolen, who had chosen justice over silence. Within a day, corporate leadership was scrambling, issuing statements, attempting damage control. But the facts were undeniable, precise, and overwhelming. Amara's brilliance could no longer be ignored. Meetings that once marginalized her became forums where her insights were celebrated. Former skeptics nodded in recognition, some quietly offering apologies, others silent, knowing they had been wrong. The project, once mired in doubt and mismanagement, now received the recognition it deserved. Engineers, analysts, and technicians praised her methodology, her calculations, her foresight. The work she had quietly safeguarded, documented, and defended became the standard for future operations, a cornerstone that could not be erased. Amara herself was invited to lead critical presentations, to teach, to inspire. Her name, once whispered in doubt, was now spoken with respect. She walked into a grand auditorium, her badge replaced by a speaker's pass, the room filled with the very people who had once doubted her. Investors, scientists, students, and journalists all turned their eyes to her, waiting, listening. She stepped onto the stage, her posture poised, her voice steady. "This work," she began, "was never just about numbers. It was about truth, integrity, and the courage to stand for what is right, even when no one is watching." The crowd held their breath. She continued outlining her calculations, the breakthroughs she had discovered, the solutions that had been ignored, and the implications for future missions. Screens lit up with diagrams she had authored, equations that once belonged only to her mind, now displayed for the world to see. Applause grew, first polite, then enthusiastic, filling the auditorium with energy. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and social media buzzed in real time. Recognition arrived not only in accolades but in meaningful change. Policies were revised to prevent credit theft and discrimination. Mentorship programs were strengthened, and Amara was invited to advise on new projects, ensuring that talent and integrity would be protected for generations to come. In that moment, the weight of months of struggle lifted. She felt pride, not arrogance, satisfaction, not revenge. The world had acknowledged her efforts, her intellect, her courage, but she did not stop there. She established a foundation to support young women, especially black women, in STEM fields, to ensure they had mentorship, opportunity, and recognition. She gave talks, wrote articles, and created programs to protect innovators from bias and theft. Her legacy was no longer a secret. It was living proof that perseverance, intelligence, and moral courage could change systems, not just individual outcomes. As the sun set on her first day of public recognition, she looked back at the journey, the dismissals, the whispered doubts, the moments of isolation, and realized that every obstacle had been a teacher, every slight a challenge to rise higher. And she rose, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. She had turned injustice into action, silence into a voice that could not be ignored. And now, she addressed you, the audience, directly, her eyes calm but fierce, her voice inviting. If you believe that brilliance and integrity should always shine through, then join us. Share this story. Like it if it inspired you. Subscribe to her secrets, her stories, so we can continue to reveal the truth. Celebrate courage, and show the world that no talent, no matter how hidden, can ever be erased. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what drives you to stand for what is right. Your voice matters, your support matters, and together we make justice rise. And with that, Amara Lewis stepped down, the auditorium echoing with applause, her journey a testament to the power of intellect, perseverance, and moral courage, a triumph of genius that would inspire generations to come.